Hey, natural science students, this is Mr. Friday. Welcome back to class. It is Wednesday and I am not here today. And so what I'm going to do is use this video to help you to engage in class. And we're going to start with a normal warm-up that we would normally have on a day. And so take a look at the warm-up question on the board. It reads something to the effect of, what are ways that we use electricity in the United States? I'm going to have some statistics to show you here in a little bit, but guest teacher, if you wouldn't mind pausing the video for about 30 seconds or so students have the opportunity to think about how we use electricity, what appliances we use it for, what we use it for in our homes and apartments. Thank you so much for pausing the video, and students, think about that question. Okay, welcome back. Let's see how we actually use electricity in our homes. This surprises a lot of people. Okay, this is our list. Now, granted, these statistics are from 2017 of how we use energy in our homes in billions of kilowatt hours in the United States. And a lot of people are surprised by the fact that space cooling is one of the primary ways in which we use energy. And so water heating is next. Yeah, you have to heat your water in order to be able to take a hot shower. Water does not come into your home or apartment warm. There's special tanks called water heaters in our houses and apartments that heat up water for us so that we can take warm showers. Lighting comes in at 9%, refrigeration comes in at 7%, but I want to draw your attention all the way down here to the bottom, this other uses down here with 31%. This is the biggest growing category of energy use in the United States, and you may be able to guess what other uses counts as. It's things like phones and some other forms of technology. Now, you can see computers reflected right here at 2%. You can see TVs and related equipment at 6%. This number is actually dropping, but 31% makes up our other uses, and one of those key other uses is for phones. And so I wanted to kick off today on the right foot, because the focus of natural science today is to give you a little background as to why we are going to be playing a game that I designed, and this is going to be happening next week. It's going to take the entirety of this 80-minute mod, and it's going to take class on Friday as well for us to be able to have an understanding of what is involved with the game, because this is a big game. If you thought the natural resources game was a big game, you ain't seen nothing yet. Okay, because the global climate change game really has a lot going for it, and the reason for that is because I want you to have a rich experience understanding how your life is going to be affected by global climate change. And so on to a short little presentation here for you. Okay, so remember this is the carbon cycle, and we had drawn a line down the side of this diagram right here, and everything to the right of this line is a cycle of carbon in our atmosphere that's been happening for the last 3,000 million years. And then over here on the left, burning of wood and fossil fuels have been largely contributing a significant amount of additional carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And it may not seem like a big deal, but the contributions of additional carbon dioxide are contributions that the Earth isn't used to. And that is having an effect on how our planet is responding to this additional carbon dioxide. So whenever we run a car with an internal combustion engine, or this is an example of an old-time coal plant where you can see that you have a lot of very dark smoke coming out of these smokestacks. Modern coal plants are a little bit less polluting and more efficient than this, but we are still contributing a lot of carbon dioxide to our atmosphere. So the question then becomes, well, what is happening to our atmospheric carbon dioxide? I first introduced this diagram to you in large group last week, and you'll notice that there is a normal seesawing of carbon dioxide that happens in Earth's atmosphere. Remember, we discovered this information by looking back at trapped air bubbles, and we can do radioactive decay analysis on those trapped air bubbles. We can also use chemical analysis to determine what elements and gases are involved. And a big thing that jumps out to a lot of people is that, yeah, there's this regular pattern of seesawing of carbon dioxide, but look at what happens around the 1800s. Boink! Jumps all the way up here. This is what the level was in 2014, and the level is now even higher than that. Global carbon dioxide has been spiking since humans started burning fossil fuels, and it has just continued since then. Here's how we know. We take ice cores and we extract information from those bubbles, as I mentioned a minute or so ago. And so many of you may be wondering, well, why do we care? How does increasing carbon dioxide hurt us? Plants take in carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis. Why is that bad? Well, it's not bad to have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's not good to have larger than normal amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from what we call the greenhouse effect. You've probably heard this before. All of this extra CO2 that would normally get captured in the ground and inside plants is staying in our atmosphere and essentially forming a bubble around Earth of what we call greenhouse gases. You know how, like a greenhouse, like if you've ever been to Lauritsen Gardens in the winter, it can still be kind of warm in the greenhouse even though it's winter outside, because the light that enters the greenhouse tries to bounce back out, but the glass stops it from bouncing back out, and the energy bounces back into the greenhouse. The same thing is true for Earth. We are having a greenhouse effect that is preventing heat energy that would normally escape back into the atmosphere. It's getting trapped inside the Earth and giving us a general warming of Earth's atmosphere. Well, the problem with this general warming is that it doesn't always cause warm in all places. We're talking about a couple of degree difference over the last several decades. But that difference of a couple of degrees can cause huge swings, more extreme weather. So if you look in the lower left-hand corner here, you can see that we have huge amounts of snow in this image right here. It isn't always warming because remember, weather and climate are not the same thing. Weather is day to day, the sorts of things that affects people on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. Climate is big changes that happens to the Earth over time, and we have a generalized warming trend that is leading to more extreme weather. So we have a tsunami here. This tsunami necessarily isn't directly related to climate change because this one was caused by an earthquake off the coast of Japan, but swelling of the oceans caused by the heating of the Earth can cause this water to be more likely to overflow dams that are preventing it from going into areas. And I mean, this is pretty scary image right here that someone took from a high story of a building. Hurricanes are getting more extreme. This has been in the news a lot lately. Droughts can get more extreme in certain places. So what are we going to do about it is the big question. Well, we need super people. And you may recognize this as the theme from the original 1978 Superman. Great movie. Chickadee, check it out if you like superhero movies. So, folks, what we really need here is super people. Okay? People who are going to come in and actually have a solutions-focused mindset for what we're going to do about this. Because we can still do things about this. Okay? One of the biggest things that we need to do is when people don't listen to each other, it's very difficult for us to solve problems. And so one of the big parts of this discussion is going to be bringing in the ethical dilemmas. The easiest way to frame ethical dilemmas is that ethical dilemmas are all about figuring out what the right combination of right is for a particular situation. An ethical dilemma is not right versus wrong. Right versus wrong should be easy and obvious for a society. I'll give you a classic example. Not murdering right, murdering wrong. Okay, that's something that generally as a society, a super majority of people agree upon. An ethical dilemma is when we're talking about what combination is right for a particular situation. The first ethical dilemma is individual versus community. Individual versus community could be summarized as, should you pay attention to what matters most for you personally, or should you be willing to give up some things in order to be able to contribute to your community? A classic example of individual versus community is driver's licensing. It is inconvenient for you to go to the DMV and get your driver's license. But this is an example of something where we err on the side of community. We accept inconveniences as individuals so that we can make sure that we have as many safe drivers on the road as possible, and then we're not endangering people's lives. We expect people from a community standpoint to follow the rules of the road, and you can potentially get in trouble or possibly hurt people when you don't follow the rules of the road. And so this is an example of something that we've agreed upon as a society, that community is more important than individual. Okay, next, justice versus mercy. I've talked about this in class before, but the classic example of justice versus mercy is justice is abiding by laws. Mercy is acknowledging that there are difficult aspects of the world that can sometimes make it difficult for us to follow laws. The classic example of this is a mother who steals in order to feed her starving child. It's not good to steal. It's also not good for a child to starve. And so this is where in the court system we may err more on the side of mercy and prevent her from getting a jail sentence, and maybe she has to do community service or be on probation instead, rather than throwing her in jail and taking a mother away from her child. Short-term versus long-term. This is something that is very, very difficult for human beings in general. And that's something that I want to emphasize here. The ethical dilemmas are not necessarily easy choices. I don't expect them to be easy choices for you. That's why we need to discuss these things. Short-term versus long-term is, are you willing to give up short-term comforts in order to have long-term health and happiness would be an example. Like, are we willing to accept maybe using our phone a half an hour less during the day so that we have less electricity that we're using up, so long term the planet is in a healthier state. That's difficult for people to make that choice, but it is a right versus right dilemma that we got to consider. We're never going to tell you during this section that you got to give up your smartphone, but at the same time we got to think about what sort of choices are you making with your smartphone that make this a critical thing to consider. And then finally, truth versus loyalty. Teenagers come up against this all the time. We want to be as truthful as we possibly can so that we can be real with each other, but loyalty is also a very strong pull that a lot of teens have. And so this is the whole controversy behind quote-unquote snitching. Okay? You don't want to snitch on your friends, I get it, but sometimes there are things that you got to tell an adult about so that your friend doesn't get hurt even more by someone who has power in order to help them. We don't want them to get hurt if we can avoid it. And so there's always this balance between being truthful and being loyal to people, and we have to keep that in mind when we're discussing these aspects of global climate change. So, in addition to discussing these ethical dilemmas, we're going to set some goals. We're going to see what we need to do to achieve those goals. Mrs. Woodington is going to take you through the goal setting process and how the goal setting process works in large group on Friday. And so we're going to focus more on the discussions and what the basic setup of the game is today. So the name of the game is Your Planet. So I just want to impart to you that it's your planet and it's in our best interest to work together to figure out what we need to do to save it. When we get to our astronomy section in quarter 2, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how incredibly difficult it is to travel to other planets. I'm a huge fan of science fiction, but if science fiction has lied to us in any way, it is that it has given us hope for finding a new location for humanity. And folks, spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you right now, there is no planet B. Okay, we have to work to maintain our own planet here in order for us to be the healthiest that we can possibly be. So here's sort of like a brief summary of the game, and I just want to point out to you that there was the green packet that you picked up when you walked in, and if you look at that handout, there are a couple aspects of this handout. There is a list of the steps of the game round on your handout. So there are 8 steps that happen in every game round, and we're going to go through all of these thoroughly over the next couple of days of class so that you feel really confident when you get to playing the game Monday, Tuesday next week. And of course, your teacher, I'm going to be there Monday, Tuesday next week to make sure that you understand what's happening and what the expectations are and how you can get something out of engaging on these issues. You're also going to notice that there is a quick play guide on page 2. If you turn the page, there's a little bit more broken out what the steps of the round are. And then at the bottom, this is really important. This is what we're going to focus most of the rest of this first half of class on, the different roles that you can play in the game. And so you might just want to have your packet open to this second page here so that you can sort of see what's going on for the different roles that different people can play while playing the game. And then on the last a couple pages, there's an example round of play. There are tips for discussions. You can look through that on your own time if you feel like you need additional understanding of things to know what's going on. In fact, we might engage with tips for discussions a little bit during the second half of class. So back to the presentation. Big picture, what is the global climate change game all about? Well, you're going to take on one of 5 roles in our society, and you may end up tag teaming one of these roles with another person. That is perfectly acceptable. Mrs. Whittington and I will decide how many people we feel is going to be best for an individual group. Odds are we're going to err on the side of having larger groups, like about 9 to 10 people around a set of tables playing the game. That way 2 of you could engage on a role, so there isn't as much pressure for one person to play the role in the game, because we want you to be in a positive state of mind while you're engaging on the issues with global climate change. So the 5 roles are education, government, industry, like you can think of that as like business, public, and research. We are all members of the public. We may also be maybe parts of these other roles. We're going to discuss issues of global climate change in order to earn money in the game. It's called action points. You're going to spend money on goals that will help you to lower the carbon dioxide meter. You're going to decide on how many goals you're going to purchase and how big of an effort you want to put in those goals. And then finally, you're going to try to stop the carbon dioxide meter, which I'm going to talk about here in a couple minutes, from going above 460, which many climate scientists agree that is the value that once global carbon dioxide gets above 460, we're going to be in serious trouble from a survival standpoint. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about the roles. Here's what the role cards look like. I do want to point out, since I'm not in class today, that each of these role cards on the back of them has a list of the turn orders, so that you have the turn order of the game ready for you to go. This is on the first page of your green packet, so I would really recommend that you hang on to your green packet between now and next week, and if you want to put it in your folder at the side of the room at the end of class, that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Let's talk a little bit about each of the roles: education, government, industry, research, and public. First thing that I want to mention about the roles is that each of these roles has different tasks that they are in charge of for the game. Also, each role has a different priority that they have for discussion, and so this is on the cards. It says discussion priority. I want to point out to you that your discussion priority could be focused on what your role is, but it could also be focused on what you personally think about the idea. There's nothing wrong with that. We want your personal ideas to come through in our discussions. Now, we also want to be respectful in those discussions, so keep that in mind. And then finally, each of these roles also has a special ability, which is very common in a lot of board games, that you can spend a little bit of money in game in order to do the special ability. And so if we take a closer look into each of the roles, this is at the table that is on the bottom of your quick play guide on page 2. So if you want to follow along, this is some basic information shaking down what all the roles are all about. So if you're sort of deciding what role you might want to play, this could help you to make your decision on that. Let's start with education. If you are a strong reader, there is some reading that needs to happen at the table for the game. The education player, probably not surprisingly, is going to do most of the reading for the game. Education role represents the role of teachers and anybody in society who can help people to understand what the issue is with global climate change and understand what the evidence says, and how education would play a role in helping to move the discussion forward. The education player reads resource and goal cards. We'll talk about more of these over the next coming days. Helps to keep discussions on track, and also reads any glossary entries that are in the rule book if anybody's curious about what something means. The education player's discussion priority is all about helping people learn. So if you're looking for something to do in the discussions in your education, what is it that people need to understand, and how can you help them learn that? The special action of the education player is that normally you would be able to draw 2 goal cards at the start of a particular part of the game round. The education player allows you to draw another goal card at the start of a round, and you can purchase that immediately. And so it'll make sense to you as to why that's a nice special ability to have moving forward. Government. Do you like being the banker in Monopoly? Well, guess what? The government role is for you. Not only is the government role the banker for the game, but they also keep the game round meter updated. We have to keep track of which round of the game we're on. The discussion priority for government is balancing the concerns of all the other roles. They're going to sort of be the mediator of the game. And they can spend a variable amount of money to potentially cancel the effect of a disaster card, a very useful special ability on the government. And that's because the government really has a lot of the resources that are necessary in order to combat some of the disasters that you are going to encounter in the game. Not all, but some. Industry is the role of business. Many of your parent or guardians may be involved in industry or business, and if you take on this role, you are all about making sure that you manage the goal cards, and you are also in charge of tracking the sync source meter. And I'll talk about updating the sync source meter. Well, actually, Mrs. Woodington is going to talk about updating the sync source meter coming up here pretty soon. Profit and practical solutions are the discussion priority of industry, because there are some possibilities that people could lose jobs as we make changes to society, and we want to be able to give them jobs so that they can make a living. And so that's going to be a big discussion priority for industry. And then the industry player has the single most powerful special ability in the whole gosh darn game, and that is that the industry player can spend 2 monies in order to decrease the sync source meter by 1 part per million. What about the public? The public player also has some reading responsibility. They read disaster cards because the public, the general public, is the group of people that is most likely to be hurt by disasters. So they read disaster cards. They also read out the resource and gold card rewards, and they are all about making sure that the level of concern meter is updated when necessary. Level of concern meter is a green meter that we start at 0, and it increases as people in society get more and more worried about what's going to happen with global climate change. The discussion priority for public is the personal future and happiness of themselves and others. Folks, it's not wrong to want happiness for you. That should definitely be a part of any discussion we are to have with this. And the public person's role is to think about, well, what would we do here that would help people to feel happy in a society while us also not being hurt by global climate change? Public has 2 special abilities. They can do one of 2 things. They can raise the level of concern meter by 1 point. That allows you to earn more money in the game. It costs you 2 money to do that. Or you can, if you catch every roll contributing to stop a disaster card, you get to raise the level of concern meter by 1 for no money. And so the public person has to be prepared to listen for people discussing, working together to stop disaster cards. And then the final role, the research role. The research person is the discussion timekeeper. Because discussions are timed, we don't just let them go for any amount of time. There's a 5-minute cap on discussion time so that we have efficient discussions. They are also the updater of the CO2 meter, and they also graph the CO2 meter. Mrs. Woodington will talk about that in large group on Friday. Their discussion priority is to increase the knowledge and understanding of humans in general. So in other words, doing research, scientific research to understand how climate change is affecting our planet. And they can spend money as their special ability to determine the exact reward of one goal, which normally there's sort of what we would call fog of war in the game, where you can pursue a role, but you may not know, or a goal, but you may not know exactly how that goal is going to affect people. And in that regard, the research player is all set up to be sure that you could spend 2 money as your special action to know what the exact rewards of a goal are before you purchase it. All right. At this stage, you're probably like, holy crap, that's a lot of information, Friday, about the different roles that exist in the game. What about the game round? Well, we're getting to that, but before we get to it, I just got to point out the single most important meter in the game, depicted here, the carbon dioxide meter. The carbon dioxide meter is going to start, we're going to clip it off at 401, which is the starting level of carbon dioxide for the game. I'm going to be honest with you, the actual worldwide CO2 is closer to around 410 right now. So just in the short number of years that I've made this game, I developed the global climate change game about 4 or 5 years ago. Just in the short time that I've been working on the game, we've already had a huge jump in global carbon dioxide. What's going to happen is keeping track of what's happening on this carbon dioxide meter not only helps you to understand what the victory conditions are with the game, but if we zoom in on it, notice how it says 1 disaster on the light blue and it says 2 disasters on the dark blue. As this carbon dioxide meter increases over the rounds that you play the game, you will have to contend with more disasters as the game marches on. And so there really is a requirement for you to really pay attention to what your goals are to try to influence what is going to happen here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the steps of the game. If you look in the very front of your green packet, you'll note that step number 1 is every roll gets 2 money. Yeah, so just like Monopoly, when you cross go, you get $200. In this game, when a new game round starts, you get two monies. Now, I do want to point out to you that money in this game is tied to the person who has the money. So if the research role gets two money for something and the public role gets four money for something, they have to decide as one of the roles whether or not they're going to contribute the money. This is something that you have to cooperate with on as a group. You cannot just put all of your money into one giant pile. If that were the case, folks, combating global climate change would be super easy. Okay, one group of people would just make the decisions about everything and people wouldn't have a vote. We wouldn't have much of a democracy. But in a democracy, people have to work with each other to try to sort out what they want to contribute to a particular goal that we're working towards. So step one of every game round is that you get two money in your roll. Step two is disaster cards. On the right of this slide, we see that there is a depiction of the Fukushima tsunami that happened in Japan a couple of years ago. It was caused by an earthquake, but it's exacerbated by swelling oceans with climate change, making it more likely that water was going to overflow and flood this city on the side of Japan. And then on the back of one of these cards, so this is what the front of the card looks like, and on the back is what you might draw at the start of the game. Now, you may be wondering, when do we draw these cards? Well, you draw cards in step 2. It's called the disaster card step, and you draw however many cards your CO2 carbon dioxide meter tells you that you have to draw. So at the start of the game, you only draw one disaster card at the beginning. It's not that big of a deal, but it still could be an issue for you. Then the carbon dioxide meter, as it rises, you're going to get to 2 disasters, 3 disasters, 4 disasters, and then you lose the game, okay, if there's so many disasters that you can't prevent them. So, for example, I'm going to read this upper left disaster card. Massive tsunamis drown coastal cities as extreme weather becomes a common reality of life as the climate changes. Then below that, there will be a block of text telling you what happens at the start of the game. So you get 2 money, and then you basically get socked in the gut, because that's kind of what global climate change is doing to us, folks. The government player loses 2 money. The public player loses 2 money. The level of concern meter increases by 1. This card cannot be canceled. So some cards can't be canceled. Some cards can be canceled, as is evidenced right here. This card says immediately increase the sink source meter by 1 part per million. That's very bad. There is another meter in this game. It's a red and blue meter that says sink source meter on it. And the sink source meter is basically going to be telling us on a -10 to a -20 to a +20 scale, how is carbon dioxide going to change at the end of every game round. The sink source meter starts at +10, meaning that until you take action, the CO2 meter is going to be rising +10 parts per million at the end of every game round until you do something. So a disaster card that increases this sink source meter, that's a bad idea. Notice how it says the industry player loses 2 money, the public player loses 2 money. This card can be canceled for 4 AP because this is seed companies rely on only a single type of crop. We could develop more crops so that we do not have this increase in carbon dioxide. And so this is an example of a card that could be canceled. So in the disaster card step, you're going to read however many disaster cards makes the most sense for what the CO2 meter says, and then you got to decide how to react to these disasters, and then we move on to step 3, which is resource card discussions. Now, at this stage, guest teacher, you can pause the video. Students are going to be taking a break when the bell rings. The rule is they must come back from break on time. If any student comes back from break late, guest teacher, please note the name of those students, and then I will deal with that a little later on. And so everybody, I hope that this first half of class made sense in terms of like the beginnings of the game. We will be talking about step 3, resource card discussions, and how to get more money after the break. And so guest teacher, you can pause the video and then play it at the start of class. Hey everybody, welcome back to the second half of class. In the second half of class, I'm going to talk a little bit about the discussion process for the game. Each game round, the level of concern meter will tell you whether you get to have 1, 2, or 3 discussions at the start of the discussion phase for the game. And the whole purpose of doing the resource card discussions is that it not only allows us an opportunity to talk about and listen to issues related to global climate change, but it is also a key way in the game that you earn money. So how will we go about doing this? Well, you can see that there are 4 resource cards here. They are all cut up and ready for you to go. On one side of the resource cards is the background information and the discussion questions, and on the other side of the resource cards is just the basics of like what you would do in order to have a pretty good discussion. So the way that the resource card procedure works is that a member of your group, probably the education player, would read the background text on one of these resource cards, and then they would read these discussion questions. And you don't have to read them all at once. You can read a discussion question and then answer it. You can read a second discussion question and then answer it. You can read a third discussion question and then answer it. And notice how the discussion time is capped at 5 minutes. Okay, so how we go about do this? Well, let's actually do like a little bit of role play. And so you would be listening to the discussion. It starts off in resource card number 1, climate change threatens the growth of many crops that humans depend on for food. World governments have responded to this threat by creating the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. The vault is a giant sub-zero freezer that holds seeds of plants that are important as human food sources. Most countries only store a single variety of a seed and no grown plants. In late 2014, a generator broke and the temperature started to rise, threatening the seeds with spoiling. With weeks before parts were available, researchers took parts from a supermarket freezer to temporarily fix the problem. And then we have a series of 3 discussion questions. What are specific examples of problems that could arise from storing only one type of seed for a plant in the vault? What problems could be avoided by saving multiple varieties of seeds? And how would you change the facility to reduce the chances of needing a supermarket freezer fix? So those would be the questions that you would discuss. And you can discuss one of them at a time. That's perfectly okay. Okay, that's great, Mr. Frieda, but how do we know if we're doing a good job? Well, let's discuss what doing a good job looks like. First thing that I want to point out is that there are going to be 3 laminated cards that every single role of the game will use to vote. You will vote on whether or not there's a great discussion, a good discussion, or an okay discussion. And there's some criteria on each of these cards that defines how good of a discussion criteria they are. Okay, so for a great discussion, notice that we are looking for logic, breadth, and depth. If you remember from the beginning of the year, logic is that we want our discussion points to make sense, that we can sort of imagine the steps within our head and those steps making sense and contributing to solving a problem. Breadth is all about understanding things from multiple different perspectives, which from understanding ethical dilemmas, that's critical. You can't make a good call on justice versus mercy or truth versus loyalty without thinking about another person's perspective. And then finally, depth would be really thinking about the details of an issue and figuring out what you would have to do step by step in order to solve the problem. What sort of examples can we come up with of how we would do that? Notice how a discussion has to be at least 4 minutes long for it to be considered a great discussion. Everybody's got to participate, or as many people as possible, and you would get a large reward if you had a great discussion. Good discussion reduces the discussion time that you were able to get out of it. 3 people participating, logic, and then either breadth or depth, and you'd get a medium reward. And then finally, an okay discussion, short discussion, just 1 or 2 participants. It might be logical, but it doesn't have breadth or depth, and there's just a small reward. And many of you may be asking at this stage, well, why wouldn't I always just vote great discussion? And the answer to that question is there's nothing stopping you from doing that, okay? I'm not going to be able to be at each group every time. I can't stop you from voting great discussion even if only a couple people were participating. The game is sort of designed to really try to encourage you to think about these issues that are going to affect you. And although I can't stop you from voting great discussion every time, there are some opportunities here really to make your future life easier by practicing discussing things with people. And along those lines, here's some tips for discussions that I want to communicate to you. We'll get to that. Let's go here. So here's some tips for not only being effective with discussions, but also things to be cautious of. And this is on the back of these discussion voting cards. So normally you would have this side of the voting card facing up. Everybody would pick one card, great, good, or okay. And then you would say 1, 2, 3, flip. And you would flip those cards over and majority rules. If the majority of people pick great, you get the great discussion rewards. If the majority majority of people pick good, you pick the good discussion rewards. If there's a tie, like 2 people pick great, 2 people pick good, and 1 person picks okay, you get the best out of the tie. So you would get great discussion. Now, that being said, what are some tips to help me to be successful with discussions, Friday? Because honestly, I'm not really sure how I'm going to be most effective here. I've had some bad things happen to me when I've been discussing things with other people, and I don't just want this to be a big argument, even though you're going to be there and trying to keep us on track. So how can you help me to be successful? Well, notice how I divided this into discussion tips and discussion cautions. Everybody, why don't you take a second to read through all of the questions on each of these 2 main sections so you can sort of get your brain going on what the expectations are. And guest teacher, you can pause the video for about a minute or so and let kids read through all these questions. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you had some time to think about these. The big thing that I've seen in the 5 years prior that I've run the game is that a lot of people sometimes don't know where to start with the discussion. So these questions are designed to help you to find places of where to start, which is why these are on the back of the voting card so that you would always have this in front of you and would understand, sorts of options that you have to participate in discussion. So question number 1, how might your role react to the questions on your discussion card? Okay, maybe you are the research player. Okay, how would a scientific researcher, based upon your best understanding, react to what this question is all about? How might the general public react to it? How might industry react to it? We can also get personal with you. What makes you excited, sad, disgusted about this particular situation, and why? And what would you want people to think about with regards to this so that we can think about solving a problem? Are your ideas reasonable and are they grounded in facts, or are you just mad and reacting emotionally to things that are happening? It's not wrong to have emotions, but reacting to things emotionally can sometimes make it difficult for us to solve problems. What would different people think of your ideas? Okay, we always want to try to empathize with other people and think about what they might think about the ideas. What would make it a challenge to solve this problem? What makes the problem complex, and what steps might be needed to solve that problem? Okay, so those are some tips to sort of try to get you going on these discussions, but we also have to be cautious that we are not going to use these discussions as a means to make the game miserable for other people. Okay? You should start by asking yourself the question, did you read the suggestions above? Okay? Are you criticizing the idea and not the person? Folks, this is something that a lot of people, both adults and students, really struggle with. Okay? We want to criticize ideas, not people. The answer to a particular question is not, well, I think that this is the case because you're stupid. Okay, that's an attack on the person, not a criticism of the idea. It would be better to say something, well, I don't think that this is a good idea because this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. Okay? You are not trying to win discussions. This is not a question of winning or losing. This is a cooperative game, folks. You are cooperating together to try to win the game. You are not out to get the other people at the table. Okay, so if you're trying to win a discussion, you got to sort of step back and ask yourself, what can I do to be part of the team? Okay, you don't want to take up all the time for the discussion. Everybody should have a voice. Okay, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have time to enunciate what you're thinking about things, but at the same time, you got to think about what other people are thinking and give them time the ability to speak so that you can listen to what they have to say. Are you putting you being satisfied over cooperating to save the planet? Because that's not going to work. Folks, we're not going to solve the problem. We're not going to contribute towards these goals with it being exclusively just about you. You're going to have to think about what other people need for a little bit of time in these discussions. And if you're using your words for the purpose of simply hurting somebody else, that does not contribute positively to discussions. And so what would happen in the game is that you would have a resource card discussion based upon whatever it says on the particular card. Just as an example, let me see if I can go back to, there they are. No, not this one. I'll get it. I got it. I'm sort of working off of what's happening just with a whole bunch of windows here. Tips are just good. There we go, resource cards. This is the one that I need. So you would read this resource card. You discuss through the questions. The research player would time the discussion. You don't have to talk for any more than 5 minutes, and you should cap it at 5 minutes so that you keep playing the game and the game moves forward. And then you vote, and you are voting based upon what you see on these cards. Okay? So if you want to vote great, good, or okay based upon these guidelines, you would have your cards so that these colored surfaces are turned down, and then you would all say 1, 2, 3, go, and flip the card over and decide what majority rules on with this as to the quality of discussion that you had. Now at this stage, some of you might be wondering, well, why the heck are we doing this? You're doing it because it helps you to earn money in the game. The richer discussion you have, the better. And you'll notice that at the back of your green packet, there is this tips for discussion section. Guest teacher, use your best judgment. If there is at least 20 minutes left in class at this stage, let's pause the video for a couple minutes and have students read through these tips for discussions. Notice the section here, the comment and question tokens have several purposes. We have eliminated the comment and question tokens from the game. And so if you just want to go through here, I'm going to highlight this section and I'm going to use the strike through feature here. You don't need to worry about this packet that I just crossed off right here, but have students take a couple of minutes to read through these tips for discussions, because this is going to be something that you're going to be expected to do when it becomes discussion time for playing the game. So guest teacher, pause the video for a couple minutes here. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you read some of these tips that could help you to understand what you're doing in the game. You should hang on to this green packet. And so some of you may be wondering at this stage, like, so what do I get out of having a discussion? Are you just doing this Friday to torture me by asking me to interact with my peers? No, that's something that you got to practice, but you'll notice that there is a special booklet on your desk called the Resource Card Discussion Rewards booklet, and this is where you would look up the rewards based upon what you have for your discussion. Now, one thing that I want to say about the Resource Card Discussion Rewards booklet is that you should try really hard to not look at any of the rewards ahead of time. I want you to be surprised when you look at the rewards, and I also want you to take the time to think about, why do only certain roles get rewards? So let's say that we discuss resource card number 1. If you turn the page in this booklet, there's a little section here that says resource card 1 and a small table saying what happened if you had an okay, a good, or a great discussion. And, you know, some of you are probably saying, well, why shouldn't I just rate great discussion at all times? You could do that, but I also want you to think about, what is the value of having certain roles getting money rewards for resource cards? Like, let's say we all voted for the first, we discussed resource card number 1 about that Svalbard seed vault, and we rated it a good discussion, which is medium. Well, when we look at this part of the rewards booklet, it says medium reward, research 2 monies, government 2 monies. Why would that be the case? Everybody take about 30 seconds to think about, for that particular goal card, why would the research player get money and the government player get money, but nobody else gets money? And I'll project resource card number 1 up here, so in case you need to read through it again, why would it make sense that research and government would be the ones who would get money from discussing this issue? Okay, got an idea? Well, developing a seed vault would require the government to maintain that seed vault. So they're going to get some money from discussing it. Research makes sense, because if you were trying to keep track of all the seeds of the world and protecting them from getting wiped out so that we can't use them for crops, scientific researchers would have to be involved with that. If you had a great discussion, that's where we bring industry in, because maybe the refrigeration industry is going to be providing the machinery that would allow us to keep those seeds ready to go, so that if we needed them in an emergency situation, we could plant them. So all of these resource card rewards are designed around this concept of making sure that we are prepared to have the discussions that we need to in order to be successful with this. So the whole idea behind the resource card process is that it allows you to have discussions that get you more money with the game. All right? And so that basically wraps up what the goal of class was for today. And with all the pausing that the guest teacher did in the middle of doing, certain aspects of the discussion here, it's entirely possible that we have a little bit of free time at the end of the 80-minute section. If we have free time at the end of the 80-minute section, that's perfectly okay. Okay, I want you to be able to think about what's going to be happening in this game, so let me give you a short little preview of what we're going to be discussing Friday in large group. Here is the list of steps for a game round, okay? In this video, we have discussed step 1, step 2, and step 3. We talked about how every roll gets 2 money at the start of every game round, and how you got to keep that in separate piles of money for each of the rolls. And remember that the roles are education, government, industry, public, and research. We talked about the process for disaster cards. You draw a number of disaster cards based upon what the CO2 meter says. Resource card discussions, you draw a resource card and you discuss it. There's a lot involved with that, including this idea of making sure that you are being mindful of what a good discussion is all about. And having the resource card discussions is all about getting more money. You get more money by rating your resource card discussions based upon whether they were great, good, or okay, and majority rules. And then you look it up in the resource card booklet. You'll notice that there are 5 more steps to the game. Draw new goals and advance already purchased goals, goal rewards for cards that advance, CO2 meter update, and then you move the game round meter 1 step higher. Truth be told, steps 1 through 3 take just about as much time in a game round as steps 4 through 8. Steps 4 through 8 go a lot quicker. So in large group on Friday, Mrs. Woodington is going to take you especially through steps 4, 5, and 6. She may have time to do steps 7 and 8 as well. We'll see how much time we have available. The whole goal of the rest of this week in natural science, because we took a test Monday, Tuesday, is for you to be able to feel like you know what's going to be happening in the game. So when you walk in Monday, Tuesday, you will get your group assignments, and then you'll be able to start playing the game right away. You'll decide who's going to do what role. You'll have these disaster cards, the discussions. You'll work towards having new goals. You'll be able to sort everything out. And so this video is a little short of about 50 minutes, and so if we have a little bit of free time in class, that's okay. It kind of sucks when I'm gone, folks, but I wanted to sort of be there in spirit by having a video available for you that would allow you to see what's going to be coming up next week with the game. So I hope everybody is having a great day. Sorry that I couldn't be there, and I'm hoping that this video will help you to understand what the expectations are moving forward. Thanks for watching, everybody. Frida out.